Council on December 13th, 2017. Carla, could you please call the roll?
Udaly.
Here.
Fritz. Fish.
Here.
Saltzman. Wheeler.
Here, and Commissioner Fritz indicated she will be here very shortly. Please call the first time certain item, item 1342.
Accept the City of Portland Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for fiscal year ended June 30, 2017.
So Ken Rust and Michelle Kirby are here to talk about the comprehensive annual financial report, which we all call the CAFR for short. Good morning, Ken. Good afternoon. What day is it? I'm totally confused already. Good afternoon, Ken.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and members of the City Council. For the record, my name is Ken Rust, and I'm the city's Chief Financial Officer and Director of the Bureau of Revenue and Financial Services. Joining me this afternoon is City Controller Michelle Kirby, and we will be presenting to you today the city's Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, or CAFR, for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2017. And I know you're going to be asking yourselves, didn't we have one of these presented to us already this year? And the answer is, yes, you did. But that was for the prior year. And we've been engaged in an initiative to produce the CAFR more timely, and the result of that is we actually get to present to you that CAFR in the calendar year in which we completed. So therefore, a unique event today. We're going to celebrate the fact that you get to hear two CAFR presentations in one calendar year. At this point, I'd like to have Michelle walk you through the findings of the CAFR and the process that we use to complete it.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and members of the City Council. The preparation of the annual CAFR is quite an extensive process, which, as you can see by the photo here, takes many hands to make it a success. The accounting division of BRFS has the responsibility.
BRFS?
Bureau of Revenue and Financial Services.
Thank you.
Has the responsibility of preparing the CAFR, ensuring its accuracy, and working with the auditors throughout the process. However, involvement is also needed from all the city bureaus, the city auditor's office, as well as our external auditors, Moss Adams, to ensure the timely, successful completion of this report. Several members of the accounting division team are here today, and if you would allow us, I'd like to recognize them for their hard work on this project.
Please note it took 5 people to hold this report up.
Yes, they will now stand so they can be identified. Thank you.
Thank you for your hard work. Excellent job.
I'll offer my colleagues $1 if they can tell me where this photograph is taken.
It's taken from the, it's in the South Waterfront, and it is taken from
the tram?
No, it's not. It's the
I'm not throwing your lifeline.
You want to shout out, call a friend?
No, it'll come to me. It'll come to me. We're going to see her all day until it comes to me.
It's our new home, the 22nd floor of the Congress Building, which has beautiful views.
I lost.
Okay, well, I'm very pleased to be able to report to you that the June 30, 2017 CAFR was published on November 1st, or 120 days after fiscal year end. This marks the earliest CAFR completion date in recent city history. In fact, by working more efficiently, we've been able to reduce the time it takes to prepare the CAFR by 49 days over the last 3 years. The initiative to produce the CAFR within 120 days was a goal set by our CFO in the spring of 2015 to establish the city as leaders in financial reporting. And now we are within the top 10% of all local governments in terms of financial reporting excellence. So why is this important? Well, timeliness is a major objective of financial reporting in that it ensures the information is relevant and useful for decision making. Preparing the CAFR in less time also allows the accounting division to work on other important reporting initiatives, such as the popular Annual Financial Report, or PAFR, which was produced for the first time last year. Now I'd like to discuss the highlights of the fiscal year 2016-17 CAFR. The good news is that our external auditors gave the city an unmodified or clean opinion and found no weaknesses or deficiencies in the city's accounting processes. In addition, the CAFR complies with state law, generally accepted accounting principles. Fund balances continue to grow, and we received the Government Finance Officers Association Award for Excellence in Financial Reporting for the 36th consecutive year. Now, the not-so-good news is that our declining net position in governmental activities. During fiscal year 2016-17, the city's net position in the governmental activities area declined approximately $150 million, which brings it to a negative $1.6 billion. This negative trend is primarily the result of GASB accounting rules for pensions, but there are also other factors. And I'm now going to turn it back over to Ken, who will provide you with a more detailed assessment of the fund balance decline, the net position decline, excuse me, and the city's long-term financial health.
Could you give me a couple of sentences, not the long version, but the short version, in terms of the treatment of the pension liability? I assume you're referring to our unique pay-as-you-go system for police and fire pension and disability funding?
Well, the city has two pensions that it has to record in the financial statements. The Oregon PERS is one, and the FPDNR, or Fire and Police, that you mentioned is the other one. And it is the larger factor, it's the largest factor of our liabilities because, like you said, of the unique funding.
So could you again, and just put this in sort of an abridged version, with regard to the non-PERS pension liability, which is pay-as-you-go. So there's really no risk of us not meeting that pension liability. And in my opinion, and I'm just one opinion, it does not jeopardize the overall financial standing of the, quote, corporation, unquote. How do they treat that liability?
Maybe if you would indulge us, I'm going to walk us through that, and I think I will address all of that question
Perfect.
and the various elements to
Then
that.
I'll
And if I
defer that
don't, certainly
question,
come
Ken.
back and ask me.
Excellent.
And this is actually a good segue because, as Michelle indicated, we have this interesting anomaly on our financial statements, this real large negative net position. And I've presented this chart to you in past sessions when we presented the CAFR, and you can see this 10-year trend. We have two major areas in which we're measuring net position. Governmental activities, which is shown as the blue line on this chart, which is basically our general fund and transportation program. They're kind of governmental activities under our accounting rules. And then under our business activities, or the orange line, if you think of the water utility and the wastewater utility, BES, those are our major enterprise business activities. Their net position is increasing over time, really reflecting the fact that they're spending a lot of money on capital, and it's not just all borrowed money, but they're actually adding ratepayer cash and equity into that capital investment. What you see with governmental activities is, in particular, the sharp drop in 2015 was we're required to put onto our balance sheet the full unfunded liability for all of our pensions, both PERS and FPDNR. And as I've discussed with you over the years, FPDNR is this interesting legacy pension system that probably no other government has quite like ours. We have a pension system for old plan members closed in 2006 when we reformed FPDNR that requires us to pay pensions when they are due, not when those benefits are earned, like our rest of our system. So we don't put money away. The charter prohibits us specifically from putting money away. In fact, we can only maintain a reserve of $750,000. So we don't have assets that back the pension liability. What we do have is a dedicated property tax levy that can be levied by the City Council up to a maximum of $2.80 per $1,000 of real market value in the City of Portland. And what we have learned over time is that that tax levy has always been sufficient and generally much more sufficient than necessary to pay all the liabilities we do. And in fact, the actuaries for the FPDR fund routinely analyze that levy and the capacity of that levy to fund all obligations when due. And what they have found through their extensive simulation processes is there's a very, very small probability that the levy would ever be insufficient. And in fact, we know from our reform of FPDR in 2006 that for a while we would be carrying basically the funding of 2 pension programs. The old pension program and all the new hires going into OPSRP or OPERS, the PERS system that a lot of our other employees are covered by. We knew we would be adding a little bit of cost to that levy, and it was a modest way to unwind that old plan. In about 2033, we hit a crossover point, and the levy requirements then decline and declined really for the rest of the forecast period. What that means is our period of risk is greatest between now and about 2033. And right now, we have way more capacity than needed to make good on those obligations. And as long as real market value continues to grow, as it has been, that capacity actually increases over time. So the question you asked, Mayor, about our unique pension system and should we be worried about it, the answer is yes, we should be worried about it, but we've taken the steps necessary to reform that plan. And that's one of the interesting things about the view of net position is if you look at this, you have $1.6 billion negative, the city's a AAA bond rated credit. How does that work? And it works because the rating agencies and others look beyond just the presentation of net position in the CAFR to the kinds of things that we have that aren't captured by standard GASB and GAAP accounting to understand whether we have a problem in our ability to pay all of our costs and liabilities when due. So those are some of the interactions that's going on. So this chart is something that we've been showing you and presenting, I think, for the last 3 or 4 years.
So Ken, again, just because we have a new council and we've had this conversation in past years, so we have a unique pay-as-you-go system, which when these new rules kicked in, required us to show it as unfunded, which was a drag on our net position. But it may be unfunded, but it's not unsecured.
That's correct, and
it's secured against the assets of the city. So why isn't there a compensatory asset or security position shown to net that out?
That's a very good question. Under GASB accounting rules, Governmental Accounting Standard Board accounting rules that we're required to follow, they don't allow the recognition of that tax levy and the future value of that tax levy to be placed as an asset, if you will, on our balance sheet. And so I'm going to walk you through a couple things that I think are really important to kind of get to your question, is because that's, at the crux of it, I think what's really important for us to understand is this is a very big negative number. But at the end of the day, is it impairing our ability to deliver, not just meet that obligation, but to deliver other services as well? So I want to provide a little bit of a framework, how I've thought about it, and how we get to the point of what we really should be focused on and worrying about. And the next chart really talks about what affects net position. And again, net position is basically assets minus liabilities. And there's a couple other adjustments too, but that's basically what it is. So what are the factors that decrease our net position? And by that, revenues or lessen expenses on a generally accepted accounting principles basis. So the things that can result in our net position declining is we have increases in pensions and other similar liabilities. That increases or decreases net position. We increase bonds payable without an offsetting asset, and we've done some of those transactions. I'm going to talk with you a little bit about that. Or we have non-cash expenses like depreciation that affect our income statement, if you will, but they contribute to expenses exceeding revenue. So these are the kinds of things that can result in us on a GASB GAAP measurement basis having expenses exceed revenues. On the other side of the equation is what can actually increase our net position. So the things that can increase our net position, are things like external grants. If we got a grant to build a capital asset, the asset's on our balance sheet, but we don't have a liability, that increases our net position. If we fund capital improvements from current revenues, that helps to increase our net position. We have an asset, no liability. Or if surplus revenues are simply held, we maintain them in a fund balance, that increases our net position. So that's some of the dynamics that are going on here. And so what we've seen over time is that the things that have really driven up the increase in the decline in net position has been our pension liabilities and basically our underinvestment in things like transportation assets. Last year, for the fiscal year, we actually ended up on a governmental activity basis with investments in capital assets exceeding depreciation. That's the first time that's happened in a while. But we still had more depreciation of PBOT assets than we put in the ground by about $119–20 million. So we're still underinvesting even though we were net positive on our capital investment side. So these are some of the dynamics that are going on. And what I've shared with you in the past is that trying to figure out what we should worry about, I think requires us to restate the net position calculation to take into account some of these unique positives that the city enjoys. So for example, I've taken those same net position figures, and for governmental activities, I've added back the value of the net pension liability for FPD&R. Why? We have a dedicated property tax levy that is available to pay that. It's always been sufficient. Our actuaries tell us that it has a very, very high degree of probability of always being sufficient. I deem that as something that should be treated as an asset, and so I've adjusted net position accordingly. I've added back the value of tax increment debt incurred in our urban renewal districts that does not result in us getting an asset back. So what happens in urban renewal, the city is the bond issuer, and those bond liabilities sit on the city's balance sheet. But what do we do with that money? We give the money to Prosper Portland, and they execute the urban renewal plans. We estimate that 75% of that liability we get about 25% back as a city asset, but 75% is on their books or elsewhere. But the creation of the urban renewal district means we get a stream of revenue to pay those bonds, and so therefore, and it can only be used for those bonds, so therefore there really isn't any impairment or inability to service that debt. I think it's a reasonable thing to adjust net position accordingly. And then finally, we've done transactions where we enter into agreements with other governments, and we have given, for example, Metro, we gave them $100 million to expand the convention center. In exchange, we were made part of an agreement where we get tax revenues from the county to pay debt service on those bonds. Those intergovernmental revenues aren't treated as an asset, but the assets allow us to service the liability, and I think it's fair to take that one off. So when you do this adjustment, what you find is that our net position in governmental activities has been relatively stable, and overall, when you combine that with the business activity growth, you see a slight increase in net position over time. And I think that that's a more fair reflection of our financial condition and strength, and it also squares up better with the way outsiders view us when they take into account these kinds of factors, people like rating agencies and investors, et cetera.
Ken, how many other cities
Have a pension system like ours, which creates such an anomaly?
I don't know that there is one. If there is, it's nothing of the magnitude of Portland. I've talked with the rating analysts from the rating agencies and asked that question. They can never give me an example.
And then the second question is, if we're already qualifying for AAA credit or close to AAA credit in key categories, isn't that in some ways the best indicator of how the how third-party evaluators view our balance sheet?
I think it's a very important indicator. Now, clearly, people have raised issues about the accuracy of those ratings. It wasn't that long ago in 2008 where there was a lot of things that were rated AAA that ended up not performing very well. But I think on the municipal side, there's a general understanding and agreement that those ratings are valuable, and they are a pretty good assessment of the creditworthiness and ability to pay obligations when due. And I think that what they do, and I know I've talked with them, is that they make these kinds of adjustments and calculations. They well understand the FPD&R liability, and they're not worried about it. And the reason why they're not worried about it is because of the tax levy that backs it and the capacity of that tax levy to be sufficient over time. So I think that the credit rating is a good assessment, and I think when you adjust our net position to take into account things that we aren't allowed to capture under GASB accounting, it starts to give you a better idea of our credit strength and our financial condition at the moment. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have some issues, and I think we need to be aware of that, and that's always where I get this, well, what does all this mean and what should we do? What we want to make sure is that we focus on the right things. And I think if you just looked at net position without any adjustment, you think we should be dealing with FPDNR because clearly that's the thing that's driving this so far negative. And the answer is there's nothing to do with FPDNR. We've done that. We're monitoring it, and that's not the worry area. The worry area for us really is our underinvestment in capital assets. And when we start tearing apart and teasing out some of this information, we start to see that that's the one area that systemically is creating a negative and a draw on our net position. And that's something that we need to focus on. And frankly, that's something the council has been focusing on quite a bit over the last couple of years. What I've been trying to do, and we've had a really good conversation and kind of a segue of, well, what does all this mean and what should we do and how are we doing long term, is I prepared this fiscal health snapshot a couple presentations ago, a way to think about some of the big financial issue areas that we're dealing with and how well we're dealing with them now and what that future looks like. And I broke it down into 3 categories: long-term liabilities in the form of PERS, FPDNR, and other post-employment benefits that we're obligated to pay. Our infrastructure liabilities in the utility area, in parks, and in civic and public safety and housing, and then our legacy liabilities like Portland Harbor and the levee system, and then employee costs. And you can see my assessment of them currently and into the future. And frankly, this is the same picture that I shared with you on February 1st of this year. I don't really see much change. You'll note that I have PERS as a red indicator, and frankly, I was concerned about that. I'm even more worried about it now. PERS year over year on our financials, the net pension liability is up $340 million, and it's going to go higher. And just as a general rule of thumb, for every $100 million increase in that unfunded liability, that's about a $10 million increase in payroll cost. 40% comes to the general fund. That's $4 million. So 3.4 times that, you can see maybe $12 million more cost coming our way with PERS. And the thing about PERS, it's dependent on investment earnings. We had a change in the assumed earnings rate that increased the liability to us because it was actually recognizing that long-term they might not earn as much money. But those are the things that we have to pay attention to, and there's not much we can do about it. FPDR, on the other hand, we understand very well, and we know that we have enough capacity to pay for it. I have that in green status, and as long as our tax system stays stable, I'm not too worried about that. We've talked about infrastructure financing. Utilities are doing well. They have big obligations. We have regulatory requirements to meet, but I'm pretty comfortable that those kinds of obligations will be met, and we've got a plan for it.
And can I just ask you about that?
Yes.
We've had this
Conversation every year about whether we need a 4th color. And the point that I would make is that according to the auditor's annual survey, just if you look at BES, something like 60 to 70% of the assets are in good or better condition. So that's a good trend line. They've got dedicated revenue from in terms of their financing model. And the council has agreed to a strategic plan for BES in particular, which promises over 10 years to maybe get to fully sustainable infrastructure. Is it still yellow on the future outlook because you're discounting the possibility that we get stuck with another LT2 or some unanticipated cost?
I think in where I'm at, why it's still yellow, I think for BES, the shade is closer to green. Although the rates and charges, I'd like to see them trending down and close to inflation levels, and we're getting there, but we're not there yet. On the water side, we're now starting the ramp up with compliance with the treatment facility. So I think that they, over the last year, might have got a little further away from green, and they're still in yellow status. So if I was going to add another color, I'd probably add purple, and because of the concern I have about PERS, I'd make it even, as deep a color as I could.
Mm-hmm. What percentage of payroll is PERS? And I understand FPDNR is the lion's share of pension, but what percentage of payroll is PERS right now? What do you project it to be?
As you're asking, I'm trying to do the mental calculation. It gets a little more complicated because we have debt service on pension obligation bonds that fold into that. And
could you get that?
I can get the number for you.
On your team
I would expect it's in the 20% range plus.
Okay, and if you could get me the current and the projected, given the current return assumptions.
So bottom line is that as good as we're doing at the moment, we have many challenges in front of us, and we shouldn't forget about that. And, you know, we got them in the area of long-term liabilities, infrastructure, and we're making a lot of improvement there. And for example, things like Build Portland are helpful. They will improve the investment in infrastructure, but they're not going to help our net position, because if we borrow for those improvements, we're going to have an asset offset by a liability. Net position won't get better, but our assets will certainly be better. So, you know, what I've talked with you about in the past is that we basically have a math problem. Our expenses, operating and capital, are growing faster than revenues, and that's been the case for a while. So we know that that's kind of a systemic issue that we're facing, and we're looking at it right now. Here we are, the best revenue picture in the city's history, and we're in a position where we're looking for reductions from bureaus in order to balance all the needs that we have, operating costs, capital costs, and new programs. So, you know, you are wrestling with that, we're wrestling with that, but we're going to have to be mindful of that, because if we don't and try to bring that into a better balance through a combination of more revenue, less cost, those kinds of things, we do risk running into a position where we could be impairing not just our current financial well-being, but the financial well-being of the future of the city. And I think that's the important takeaway, is that we need to be constantly mindful of some of the systemic issues that we're wrestling with. You know, in summary, Michelle talked a little bit about what the CAFR, you know, presented to you. We're in full compliance with all of required accounting and standards. We have an unqualified or unmodified opinion. You know, our financial position is strong, fund balances are growing. But we do have issues that affect our long-term health that we have to pay attention to. We have a track record of doing that, and I know that that's what's going to provide us the capacity to deal with that going forward. That really is the story. It's the same story we've been telling you, and it's a continuation of that story. But if you would indulge me for a few minutes, you know, this is the last time I'm going to get the chance to talk to you in my capacity as the city's chief financial officer. And I'd like to conclude the presentation with some thoughts about, you know, the financial operations of the city and what I've been able to help contribute to over my career. You know, over the past, you know, few months, I've had a chance to reflect on the more than 35 years that I've been working for the city in a variety of capacities on a broad range of projects and programs. You know, one area that I'm really the most proud of is the contribution that I have made to growing and improving the city's financial management capacity, particularly in three foundational areas that I'd like to discuss with you today. First, I'm really proud of the city's financial and policy framework that I inherited, an edifice that was built by my predecessors and mentors, people like Mark Gardner, Steve Bauer, David Smith, Tim Grew, and others. They laid down its initial underpinnings and structure and taught me what it takes to maintain, improve, and protect it. While the names of these individuals, soon to be joined by myself, will fade and be forgotten, I'm confident that the financial foundation and legacy of excellence that has been created will endure and continue to guide the city's decision-making. I want to acknowledge the vital role that you, the City Council, and the council members that preceded you have played in the city's financial success. Without your willingness to support the development, adoption, and implementation of sound financial policies and practices, the city would be facing a far different financial future. You know, balancing the wants and needs of our community within the fiscal boundaries that we operate within, it's never easy. However, when faced with the truly tough financial decisions, you have always erred on the side of financial prudence. And for that, I'm deeply appreciative. I also want to recognize the important role that our internal and external auditors play in reviewing our financial practices and performance, identifying issues and weaknesses when they occur, and recommending ways in which we can improve. While we may not always agree on every issue or finding or how best to proceed, I do know that our auditors are motivated to help the city continue improving its financial performance. Second, I'm proud to have helped maintain and improve the city's credit ratings, which are critically important to the city's financial operations and are integral to almost everything we do. Credit ratings are a shorthand way for finance professionals like myself to measure how well we're doing, as it provides an independent assessment or grading of our work. Early in my career, when visiting Moody's Investor Services offices in New York on credit rating visits, I was struck by the artwork that adorned their entryway to their building at 99 Church Street in Lower Manhattan. an imposing metal frieze depicting two allegorical figures standing atop the inscription, "Credit, man's confidence in man." The city's credit ratings reflect the confidence that external parties place in the city's financial integrity and its capacity to honor and fulfill its financial obligations in good times and bad. When I started working for the city, it had already earned its AAA bond rating, and we have never lost that rating while I've been charged with its management. In fact, during my watch, the city has never had a downgrade of any of its direct credit ratings. We've achieved numerous credit ratings upgrades, but never a downgrade, even during times of tax law and legislative changes, recessions, great recessions, and citizen initiatives that threatened our fiscal health and stability. The city has fulfilled and continues to fill that underlying credit premise, man's confidence in man, and has earned the financial integrity that comes with it. Lastly, I am proud to have worked with so many dedicated and talented finance managers, bureau directors, city attorneys, and staff over the course of my career, and for the opportunity to help grow, develop, and lead the city's financial services. Since returning to the city in 2014, I have been committed to creating a high-performing financial services organization and establishing the Bureau of Revenue and Financial Services as the trusted advisor and voice on city financial matters. With the support of my Bureau colleagues, each of whom has my deepest respect and appreciation, I believe I've achieved that goal. With a solid foundation in place, I am confident that the city will continue the strong financial management that supports all that we do to serve the citizens of Portland. You know, looking back on my career at the city, it surprises and humbles me to see all the things that I've been part of, made more special by the fact that I was born and grew up in Portland. I am proud to have been part of making Portland a better place for Portlanders, and I'm proud to be a public servant. Thank you for your support and for the opportunity to serve the city of Portland.
Ken, thank you. And I know everybody up here wants to say something as well. Why don't we accept the report and dispense with the business?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Fish, a second from Commissioner Fritz. Any further discussion on the report? Please call the roll.
Udaley?
Well, thank you for the report, and I'm sad that I haven't gotten to pick your brain more this year, but maybe I'll be able to do that even after you're gone, depending on where you're headed. Aye.
Fritz?
Well, thank you for the report, and it is sobering news in some ways that we do need to continue figuring out how we're going to pay for the obligations in the years to come. Thank you for your work making that more likely and more possible. Thank you for all you've taught me over the last 9 years. I half expected you to end your speech with, and for this reason I am filing for Commissioner Saltzman's seat, because it would be a solid resume for any ongoing service to know what you've done for the city of Portland, and you actually can have the dollars and cents to prove it. So I'm very glad that I've had the opportunity to work with you, and I wish you all the best. Aye.
Fish?
Well, Ken, I want to join my colleagues in thanking you for your public service. We live in a time when public service has been degraded and attacked, the very idea of public service. And yet, when you think about it, if it were not for people like you and for governmental institutions, people would not get the services that they've come to expect. And the confidence that people have in their government is in large part a reflection of the confidence they have in the systems that are set in place. I think Commissioner Fritz would join me in the following sentiment, that during our service together, I've served a little over 9 years, she served almost 9 years, there have been a number of reforms that have been adopted during our tenure, which I think we would both agree have had a significant impact on improving the quality of the work that we do and the improved public attitudes towards our city and other things. And for me, 3 of the top reforms are creating an independent budget office, supporting the independence of the elected auditor, and reestablishing the chief financial officer position and making sure that that office was independent and reported both to the CAO and to the city, to the council. And I think those three reforms have had and will continue to have a significant impact on the very issues you've addressed in your farewell address. I will say on a personal note that I can think of only a couple times in my service where I was undecided on an issue, and the last person I spoke to was the person that convinced me that I should go back to my basic instinct on something. And on a very high-profile issue that we will not belabor publicly, you were the last person I spoke to. You gave me very candid, direct advice about the financial implications of a big issue before the council. And because of my great respect for you, it was the tipping point in causing me not, to get to a point where I could not support the then proposal. We owe you a great debt of gratitude. I wanted to ask you before you lost the mic, outside of PERS, what's going to keep you up at night? But I think from the chart and all those red lines, I think I know what's going to keep you up at night. But we owe you an enormous debt of gratitude for your work. And just speaking as one commissioner that's had a chance to work with you on some very challenging issues, it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you very much. Aye.
Wheeler?
Long before I had the privilege of working directly with you, Ken, I heard about you from a number of people. And as people may remember, maybe they don't, I actually used to have another job with the state for 6 years as the state's treasurer. And during that time, PERS was very much front and center. My piece of that puzzle was really the investment side of the equation and making sure that our pension system continued to get the top returns amongst our peers in the United States, which we did then and which we continue to do to this day. But the reality is the structure of the pension system is very problematic when we look at long-term liabilities and we look at what it does to school district and county and municipal government budgets. It is a problem that has not been fully addressed and which must be fully addressed for the sake of all of the services that we provide that the community expects and wants us to provide, not just here in Portland, but all around the state. And on a whole host of issues, your name would always come up as somebody who I should speak to, who I should consult with, as somebody who is trusted, both amongst professionals in the finance community as well as people who were maybe laymen. And your job is a unique one and has been a unique one in that you walk in both worlds. You don't get to just go and talk to the people at Moody's and have very cerebral technical conversations around bond ratings or unfunded liability or whatever. You also then have to come into this chamber and work with all of us. And we have varying degrees of technical expertise on the matters which you have outlined today. And you have to explain it to the public. And explaining some of this complex financial machinations to the public, it's time consuming and it can be frustrating, but you've done it with aplomb and directness. You've worked for the city for 20 years. You've provided sterling public service. And I will tell you, I understand people retire or people move on to other parts of their lives, and they should, and you should, and you have lots of potential in really any direction you want to go. I will miss you, and this institution will miss you, and the shoes that are left to be filled in your absence are substantial. And I'm just going to put out your summary as where you think we should be going and what you think we should be putting front and center. And I want to assure you I will continue to fight hard on all of those issues to make sure that we address these issues. One final thought. The finance shop, and I guess I'm speaking broadly to your colleagues as well, is largely invisible to the rest of the world. I felt that way when I was the state treasurer. You know, I'd sit there in my office and I'd wait for people to come and visit, and nobody ever would.
So he ran for mayor. He wanted a little more attention.
I wanted a little more action. A little more action. But the truth is, it's one of those roles. It's like the backbone to a body. It's critical, but you don't know it's there until you've cracked it. And the same is true with financial services and the financial operations of the city government. What you do is critically important. It's the backbone. It's the revenues. It's the support for our bonding mechanism. It's our ability to pay for capital construction projects and other improvements. And nobody notices it until it's on the front page of the paper. And believe you me, there is never any article going, oh my God, can you believe it? For the 17th year in a row, the city of Portland has a AAA bond rating. Read below. Nobody cares. But the minute that bond rating is squandered and the cost to taxpayers for every capital construction project goes up substantially, then people are going to notice and they're going to care. And you always operated as though you clearly understood that it's not just about the ledgers and the spreadsheets and the pro formas. You understood that what's represented in those numbers and those columns and those complex calculations is our ability to serve the most vulnerable people in this community. That's what was at stake, and you got it. And boy, will I miss you. Great job. I vote aye. The report is accepted. Thanks for your service.
Thank you.
And to all of you in the finance arena, thank you for your service as well. Next up, 1343.
Results of financial audit of the City Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for fiscal year 2016-17 and related communications.
Madam Auditor, good afternoon.
Mayor and Commissioners, I am City Auditor Mary Jo Caballero, and it is my pleasure today to introduce Jim Lanzarota and Fiona Howell Earl. Mr. Lanzarota is a partner in the accounting firm Moss Adams, which audited the city's fiscal 2017 financial statements. Ms. Howell Earl is a principal management auditor in my office, and she oversees the city's accounting contract and acts as the liaison between Moss Adams and city bureaus. These statements are important resources for community members, taxpayers, investors, and decision makers to understand what fiscal shape the city is in at a moment in time. Once management has prepared the financial statements, federal and Oregon law and city charter require an independent audit be conducted to determine if the public can reasonably be assured that they fairly represent the financial position of the city. It's important to note what financial audits don't do. They do not provide opinions on whether the city is spending appropriately, making good decisions, or what the long-term future may hold. We have to rely on other types of assessments to determine the answers to those questions. So Jim is going to present the audit results now, and Fiona is also available to answer any questions that you have.
Mayor Wheeler, fellow council members, thanks for the opportunity to come before you and present the results. Wow, hard to follow that. I'm kind of reminded of a few years ago presenting to Metro. We do Metro's audit as well. And I followed a group of about 6 fifth grade girls who had just completed an amazing science project to deal with a problem in our landfills, styrofoam. They had come up with a solution that ate styrofoam so that it wouldn't land or stay in our landfills. And I had to follow that. And these 5th grade girls were eloquent and did an amazing job. And then I follow up with the audit results. I kind of feel that way a little bit, Ken, after following this discussion of a long and storied career for a pretty recognized finance professional across the nation, not just in Portland, Oregon. But anyway, I'll do the best I can. So obviously, we performed an audit for the city, and I would say our audit could probably be broken down into about 6 phases for you. So the first phase, I think you have a pretty good understanding. An audit is that independent verification of the numbers that appear in these financial statements. How accurate is this? And does this contain all of the footnote disclosures and bells and whistles that are required by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board that Ken mentioned? So that's looking at source documents, that's talking directly with your bankers and custodians of your cash and investments. It's talking with your legal counsel, and obviously looking at things that verify these numbers. A second phase, though, which may not be quite as evident, is that obviously it requires a lot of what we call internal controls. What are those checks and balances that management uses to ensure that they can put this document together accurately? We have an obligation to evaluate those. Are they properly designed? And in fact, is management following those internal controls? So a second phase is doing that evaluation and then telling you if there are weaknesses. Are there things you need to be worried about in terms of their ability to get this right? A third phase, since you're an Oregon Municipal Corporation, you're required to follow a number of state laws, and I'm required to do testing of a few of those. There's about 6 or 7 specific areas, and 2 that we spend the most time. One is how well you administer the budget. So the public process to which you put your budget through, the changes to that budget after it's adopted, and so forth is a big emphasis for us to determine how well you've done that. A second area is public purchasing. You know, that's a very transparent process, and you've got a whole department dedicated to procurement. A number of state laws there, we test that. And there's a number of other areas. So testing your compliance with certain state laws. A fourth area is in testing your compliance with federal grants. So as you know, you're very fortunate. You've got a number of folks here that write grants that help fund the various services that you provide. We have an obligation to do testing of those grant programs and make sure that in fact you are complying with the applicable requirements to those. A fifth phase is really you have the staff, as Ken mentioned, and sought some recognition for the team of individuals here. You've got the people that put this document together. A lot of my brethren out there have to actually prepare this document in addition to auditing it. So we have the luxury of not preparing it in your case, thank goodness. So our role is to do that technical review. Does this match what we audited? And in fact, is it meeting all those bells and whistles? And does it meet those additional requirements of that certificate of excellence that Michelle mentioned? 36 years? 36 years in a row. That's pretty impressive. And then finally, a sixth phase is what I would just call reporting. So we do all this work, and we have an obligation to report to you the results. So you're helping me meet that kind of that final phase. All right, let's get to it. Actually, you've already heard the results, so this is rather anticlimactic. So on page 13 of this, you'll find our opinion. And in technical terms, we call it an unmodified opinion. So basically, we did not have to modify it for any of the things that we identified through our audit process. And I think Michelle mentioned, we call it a clean opinion is a good way to refer to it. I think that's something that can resonate with most of us. So we've done a lot of work to get there, but we're very pleased to say that at the end of it, we're satisfied that this is materially accurate and we got to a clean opinion. On that internal control issue that I mentioned to you, so as a result of our work to look at how well those internal controls are designed, and in fact is management following those, again, we have no issues that we're required to bring to your attention. So your folks are doing a very good job at identifying appropriate internal controls. They're designed effectively, and there weren't any significant weaknesses that we believe are important to bring to your attention. Another excellent result. On state legal compliance, so those state laws that I mentioned to you, so in all the areas that we tested, we did not identify any areas of non-compliance. And the unique thing about the state law testing is it's a pass-fail test. You could be out of compliance by $1, and I have to bring it to your attention. It's not like there's a materiality we can apply to that. But we've identified no areas of non-compliance. And you might recognize, and you've been a victim of this in the past, probably the most common type of non-compliance is an overexpenditure. Somewhere in the multitude of funds that you manage, somewhere we're going to slip up and a bill is going to come in at the end of the year, and we didn't adequately provide for it in the budget, and we have an overexpenditure. But this year you had 0 funds that resulted in over expenditures. So that's a pretty nice milestone for you. On the federal grants, so you received over $29 million, or I should say you spent over $29 million of federal grants this last year. And we actually tested over 89 million when you include some of the grants you've received in prior years are loaned out. So the value of the loan receivable on the books becomes a number we need to pay attention to. So the total breadth of grants that we looked at was over $89 million. We ended up testing 3 of the larger grants this year on a risk basis. The Homeland Security Grant, a Lead Hazard Reduction Grant, and your Home Investment Partnership Grant, which I think houses most of those loan programs. And within those, again, we did not have any findings of non-compliance that we're required to bring to your attention. That's also a nice milestone. You've had some instances of non-compliance in prior years, but no instances of non-compliance. You know, we also have to look at internal controls that you use that help you in meeting the compliance requirements on those grants. And if you have weaknesses in those, we need to tell you about it. We did not identify weaknesses in your internal controls over managing those grants. So that's another pretty phenomenal result. So, in addition to the reporting phase, we do have some required communications that we make to governing boards, and we've issued a letter. So you've already seen that. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it. It's not my intention to read it. There's probably 7 or 8 areas in there. But I thought I would hit on just a few that you might want to know about. For example, it's oftentimes that you want to know, geez, did we have any problems in the course of our audit? You know, are we asking questions and management is not being forthright or transparent or causing any problems for us? And we encountered no difficulties. So I think, as you can tell from Ken and Michelle, you know, no one likes to be audited, but I think they see the value in it and embrace it. We've never experienced any particular difficulties in performing our work. Another area that boards want to know is, did we have any audit adjustments? So we came in, we did our work, and guess what? We found an error, and management needed to post some adjustments. And you can probably already tell, we didn't identify any errors that required management to post corrections. And in fact, sometimes we have to identify maybe smaller errors that are not material, but there weren't even smaller errors that were required to kind of report to you. Another area that our boards like to know is, did we have any disagreements with management? You know, maybe they don't like a particular accounting treatment. No one liked that pension liability when that had to be booked in its fullest intent. And I'm happy to report we had no disagreements with management about any technical issues or the application of our audit procedures. We've had some good-spirited discussions, which I would put in the healthy category, but nothing that I felt would be important to bring to your attention in terms of something that would not be good. So, a lot of work and a pretty quick summary for a fantastic result to your audit, and hopefully, and I bet you can probably appreciate the amount of effort that goes into it in order to have that type of result. So I hope you feel good about this report from me and the result from your audit. And with that, I would just be available to answer questions that you may have.
Commissioner Fritz?
I'm just wondering about the mind of an auditor that's been working like this, that when you get to the end and it's all clean, do you think, oh my goodness, if I'd have looked a bit harder, I could have found that one thing? Or if you find the one thing, you're like, yes, I got it. I mean, just what goes through your mind as you're doing this due diligence?
You know, it's a mixed bag. Obviously, it takes a team of people, just like Ken mentioned. You've got a team of very qualified people in the finance department. I have a very qualified team of individuals that it takes to do the audit work. We have some youngsters, they're trained to find errors. I mean, they're ready, you know. They want to glom on, and oftentimes in their angst to find an error, they may report something that really isn't an error. And we have to kind of calm them down and say, you know, nice effort. So, you know, part of it is that we want to encourage our people to really hang on and find those errors and you feel good when you find one in a sense, because that's what we're trained to do. So when we don't find one, it can be a mixed blessing.
Take them out for ice cream or something.
But the nice thing about it is, it's almost like your doctor. You go into the doctor and you go there and you pick one who's very qualified, right? They do a thorough, and at the end, you're hoping for that clean bill of health. And when you walk out, you feel good about it. I feel good when we can walk out and give our clients a clean bill of health. We know the level of effort we put them through to get there. And so it's a mixed blessing. Our staff maybe walk away a little disappointed. They didn't get their, their error moment. But it feels really good to find folks that care about what they do, and they do a good job in the performance of their duties.
That's a really helpful analogy. Thank you.
I have a question, just curious about your view of something. In the management's discussion in the CAFR, it says that in the first 6 months of 2017, inflation has risen 4.8%, which is pretty astonishing. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be annualized over the course of the whole year, but obviously there's been an uptick in cost of living here. When we bill Portlanders for utility services, we provide them with a combined bill. It's part water, part sewer, stormwater. Water's about 1/3, sewer, stormwater is about 2/3. From your point of view, when you look at these numbers, is it fair for us to treat that as a combined bill and refer to the fact that combined and weighted, it's about a little over 4% in terms of cost, which would currently be below the rate of inflation?
Wow, that's a tough question. I don't know if I have a good answer for you. Obviously, those are related services. I don't know anyone, there aren't many people that provide water, I think, independent from stormwater services. So it doesn't surprise me that it's a combined bill, or that you would look at a rate or rate increases together. And ultimately, it seems to me you ought to feel good about the comparative rate that you have compared to other utilities around you, and how well you're doing, and what's your trend line compared to others, and how well you're managing the long-term sustainability of your capital assets and the repayment of your debt.
So and I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
Sure.
And ask for, as a certified auditor here, but we sometimes get some pushback when when we send a combined bill. But the way we look at it is, these are services that are folded in. Mm-hmm. It's one bill, and what people really want to know is, how's my bill going up? They don't actually calculate what's my water rate, my this, my that, weight it. They look, am I paying any more? And we've kept rate increases just above 4%, which used to be above the rate of inflation. But I was really struck by the fact that the rate of inflation has spiked. And so we may be in an environment now where utilities, the annualized rate increases for utilities and in terms of a combined bill is actually below the rate of inflation.
Yeah, that's surprising. That's probably an excellent place to be in. I would say that's probably unusual for a majority of our clients for that to be the case. I would say a majority of our clients are dealing with aging infrastructure, and bills are going up by a pace larger than inflation because they're paying catch up. Or playing catch up.
One other question. This is your, how many years have you come before us?
Yeah, I think that we have bid on doing your audit 3 times, if I remember right, and have been successful in that bid process, and we're in the first year of the current contract.
So I think this would probably be the 6th year that we've had the financial audit presented.
So 6 years, and my recollection is in many years ago, you dinged us a couple of times on how we booked grants. And I think the lesson for me was that's complicated.
Yes.
How you book it, how you allocate it. And it was a couple of bureaus, PDC, Housing Bureau in particular, that you singled out. Does the absence of a finding about any problem with how we book grants generally, does that indicate that sort of the city is the city folks who have to administer this now have a better understanding of what's required?
I would like to think so, and you're right, that's a very complicated area. You know, when you think about your utilities, you know when you're entitled to that revenue. You deliver service, you deliver some water, you're entitled to be paid for that. You know the timing of that. I deliver some water this month, I'm entitled to that revenue. When it comes to grants, those generally are not exchange transaction resources and the revenue from those. You've done a good job of accounting for that. We have had some issues in the past, and we haven't had an issue in that regard for quite some time. So I would like to think that, yes, you've got some pretty smart people that really understand those accounting rules about when it's appropriate to recognize those resources.
Good, thank you.
So I have a question, James. You heard the CAFR in the prior presentation,
Yeah.
and the punchline for that was that expenses are growing more rapidly than our revenue structure, and that was a concern. And the auditor notes in her letter to the council that you had also indicated in communications your concern about this, but you said it did not rise to a material level.
Correct.
At what point would it rise to?
I would say I'm in agreement with Ken. Right now, you don't have an issue there. At the point in time that if there's another property tax limitation measure, if all of a sudden you're subject to compression, if you've got a decline in the value of property here in Portland, that might be problematic, and I might amp up our level of discourse with you about that. I'm not worried about it as an auditor for some of the same reasons I think Ken is telling you he's not worried about it, because it feels like you're taking appropriate steps. You changed the plan in 2006, you put all the new members into Oregon PERS, which is funded on a current basis, so you'll work through this problem over time. The other thing is that you're receiving, I believe it's every 2 years, an evaluation of that property tax stream. So you're getting someone that's projecting out what's happening with property values and with property taxes, so that you're going to know in advance, or I'd like to think you're going to know in advance if you start seeing trend lines that will be problematic, and hopefully you'll get that at enough time that you could take steps if necessary. I'd like to think that you've got enough information to be able to take some steps well in advance of an actual shortfall of cash to make those payments.
Great. Now I'm going to take you down one of my famous rabbit holes for a moment.
Okay.
You don't necessarily need to follow me. Commissioner Fish is responsible for utility bureaus, and there is a significant capital requirement to be able to keep those operational. I'm responsible for emergency responsiveness and resiliency bureaus. What do you guys do, and what happens to a community like Houston in the wake of a massive disruption to the property tax system? What happens?
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer that question, if I've experienced such a thing in my tenure. You know, in terms of the financial statement and an auditor's opinion on it, we have to look at the revenue streams that are, what's the cost of providing service? What are the revenues you have available? If there's a significant shortfall, what we're looking for is for management to adequately disclose those facts within this document. If they disclose the facts and are very transparent about it, you'd probably still get a clean opinion.
Do you guys have questions, comments? Great report and presentation. Madam Auditor, last word, anything else?
Nope, we just wanted to provide you with that information.
Excellent. Please call the roll.
Udaley.
Thank you for the report. Aye.
Fritz.
Thank you for your report and for making it understandable, and thanks especially for explaining the mind of an auditor, at least at times. Aye.
Fish.
Yeah, I really appreciate the report, and I appreciate that you alluded to a kind of a respectful but creative tension between your office and our team in sort of going through this process. So the goal is to get it right.
Yeah.
And the fact that, you know, that some of the things we used to get dinged for are not showing up with the same regularity is certainly a point of pride for those of us on this side. So thank you for your good work, sir. Aye.
Wheeler.
Great report, but that's because it's a clean report. I vote aye. Thank you. We appreciate that. We are not able to move on
We
to
go to
the...
1346.
That was my request, if we can do that, Commissioner. Do you have all the people you need for
We
1346?
did. So do we have the BES team here for 1346? Why don't you come on forward?
Perfect, good. If you wouldn't mind calling 1346, please, Carla.
Authorize a competitive solicitation for price agreements for construction services at the Columbia Boulevard Wastewater Treatment Plant, Tryon Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant, and associated pump stations for an estimated $6 million.
Commissioner Fish, would you like to also read 1347, or would you like to hold off on that?
Let me see.
We could also do 48.
They're totally
Commissioner.
different people.
Totally different. Very good.
So I just have a brief introduction, and we're also...
Very good.
Paul
Commissioner.
Studo just stepped out to take a phone call. Should you
That's
want me
okay.
to go grab him?
No, it'll take me a minute to tee it up, and then we'll get started. Mayor and colleagues, we're joined today by Aaron Lawler, who's an engineer with the Bureau of Environmental Services, and soon to be joined by Paul Sudo of the BES as well. This ordinance would authorize the city to obtain price agreements through a competitive process for small and medium-scale maintenance projects that are needed at the city's 2 treatment plants and nearly 100 pump stations. And by the way, if any of my colleagues would like a tour of a pump station of your choice, it's actually one of the coolest things in our capital inventory.
I think I already signed up, just waiting for my ride.
All right. The establishment of price agreements with the city's prime contractor development program will provide minority and women certified contractors an opportunity to gain experience while providing a model where the city's equity goals can be more predictably met or surpassed. These small to medium projects occur throughout the year and are required to provide reliable wastewater treatment service essential for protecting public health and our environment. And I would welcome again Paul and Aaron to walk us through the presentation. Aaron, are you going to do the PowerPoint?
I am.
Why don't you go ahead?
I guess we'll just jump right into it. Good afternoon. I'm Aaron Lawler, engineer with BES Wastewater Treatment Engineering Group. And Paul Sudo may join us shortly. He is the principal engineer now at BES. We're here today to talk to you about our ordinance request for a price agreement furnishing on-call construction services at Columbia Boulevard Wastewater Treatment Plant, Tryon Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant, and the associated pump stations. As the name suggests, this will be for on-call construction services at Columbia Boulevard and Tryon Creek, which are pictured here. Columbia Boulevard is on the left. This is the city-owned and operated treatment plant with a capacity of 450 million gallons a day, and it is the largest wastewater treatment plant in Oregon. On the right here is Tryon Creek, which is located in Lake Oswego and operated by the city of Portland. We will also be using this contract to maintain our pump stations. The city of Portland operates nearly 100 pump stations throughout the city for pumping wastewater. Pictured here are 2 examples. Side note, the one on the left there is Alder Pump Station, which is currently under construction and looks completely different right now. That whole building is gone. This contract will be used to administer on-call construction services for improvements and maintenance. So BES's wastewater treatment and pumping facilities are aging and require ongoing rehab, repair, and modifications. We call that the RR&M program. We do this to maintain an adequate level of service for our ratepayers, our customers. The projects are typically, for our line of work, small to medium-sized projects. We're defining that as less than $750,000 in construction costs, and they are often requiring an accelerated schedule, and a lot of that cost is typically equipment and materials. The wastewater treatment engineering and pump station engineering group need to be able to deliver projects efficiently and effectively, and this program enhances that ability. An on-call construction services price agreement would allow the engineering team to be more responsive and effective on smaller scope projects, improving the quality of service that the city provides the ratepayer. The photo here is one of our engineers at Columbia Boulevard observing the wet weather clarifiers, and those are some new scum skimmers that she put in. Through this program, we will be able to issue individual task orders to pre-selected contractors on an on-call construction services to efficiently and effectively deliver projects. The task orders will be $750,000 or less and issued to pre-selected contractors on a rotational basis. On this slide here, we have examples of some projects that would be good candidates for this. So the top picture there is the dry weather clarifiers at Tryon Creek. The components associated with that need to be replaced, and there's a short window of dry weather time that we're allowed to do that. The bottom picture is a typical valve vault at Tryon Creek. There were some safety hazards raised by staff there, and we needed to effectively mitigate those concerns quickly. And then the right there is the waste gas burners at Columbia Boulevard, which are 40 plus years old and need to be replaced. Again, some more projects that we are targeting or would have been good candidates for this type of delivery. We have hypochlorite lines on the bottom left that are leaking and need to be replaced quickly. This is the middle picture there is a giant 42-inch flow meter at Columbia Boulevard, relatively small project. Can also do small pump stations for stormwater treatment and HVAC work as well. So project benefits. This program will improve our responsiveness and effectiveness for the engineering group to deliver smaller scope projects. The price agreement will allow engineering to bring contractors on board during the design phase, allowing for constructability reviews, which can allow for cost savings during design and construction. The task orders will be paid on a time and materials basis, which will allow for flexibility during construction if changed conditions are encountered. And importantly, it will allow disadvantaged minority, women-owned and emerging small business construction firms to build experience on typical wastewater treatment and pump station projects with the city. Because we will be advertising this to the sheltered market, the prime contractor development program. So the current budget estimated for this is $6 million. The invitation to bid will be sent to the prime contractor development programs, creating an opportunity for DMW ESB contractors to gain experience with the city. It will be a competitively bid price agreement, and selection will be based on the low bids. The rates submitted in the bid forms will be the basis for the awarded task orders in the future. That's how the time and materials will be paid. Up to 3 contracts will be awarded at $2 million each. That's assuming that we get 3 responsive and responsible contractors, and the max task order amount has been set at $750,000, but it's believed that the majority of the task orders would be $500,000 or less, and again, the majority of that is equipment and material costs. And this slide is just a summary of what I just went over. So we're here in front of you today with our recommendation to authorize the advertisement of an invitation to bid to the DMW ESB market for on-call construction services price agreement at Columbia Boulevard Wastewater Treatment Plant, Tryon Creek Wastewater Treatment Plant, and associated pump stations. And that's it for the presentation. I'll let Paul do opening remarks now.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron, appreciate it. Paul Sudo, Interim Principal Engineer, BES. So I just wanted to say a couple of things on this, and that's basically that the on-call construction price agreements are a much-needed tool for BES staff to deliver our projects for the treatment plants and pump stations, and that it's been an effort that's been very thoughtful over the past few years. We started this a few years ago. We engaged utilities outside of the Portland area that have been doing this model for years. We also looked at similar processes within BES. to come up with this approach. And then we spend a lot of time working with our staff at Procurement Services and also the City Attorney's Office to come up with this process. So that's, just wanted to put that into perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
A question?
Commissioner Fritz.
So I understand the need to have on-call contracts, and that's what this does. I was struck in the presentation by the limit being $2 million, which is a lot of money for each contract. And I know that BES in particular has had great success in the past with, instead of doing low bid, with the construction manager, general contractor way of doing things. And so I'm wondering about putting this amount of money out in low bid when we might be able to do better on some of our other goals by the other method.
So we, BES, we haven't done CMGC that often. It's been kind of a newer effort that we're looking into. We've typically done low bid. And I'll say most of the projects that we do low bid on, they're in that, I'll say $1 to $2 to even $3 million range, with the floor being closer to about $500,000. So this helps us with kind of our, I'll say our entry-level projects, which seems to marry well with the contractor development programs.
Yeah, and clearly the size of the budget and the kinds of projects are pervasive. I would invite you to talk to people in parks about some of the ways, even though it takes a little bit longer to do the CMGC, the construction manager, general contractor. We have found that it does provide more opportunities to bring in subcontractors to help with our emerging small business, women, minorities numbers. So just something to think about for the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Any questions for the panel? Is there any public testimony on this item? Yes. You guys can, you can go cool your heels. You don't need to sit up here if you don't want. Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Lightning. I represent Lightning Super Watchdog X. Number one, I want to make it clear that when you call certain things reports, you do have the discretion to also have public communication. That is your discretion. So keep that in mind on the last resolution, because public does like to speak. Now, moving on with the issue, is that I want to make sure we have an emphasis on these type of jobs now that it is a Buy America requirement. And as you know, on the federal grants that you're beginning to review, the terms in the federal clauses are very clear that they want a FTA regulations Buy America requirement. And we need to follow those rules, especially when we're looking at the federal grants, which I didn't have the opportunity to speak on these other issues, which is a very important issue when you do have an accountant going over those type of clauses and terms and exactly what they're looking for, and to understand that when it does say that, you need to follow those terms, plain and simple. And if you don't, you are in violation. So again, I just want to make it very clear on these type of restoration type agreements, contracts, that they do understand it is Buy America requirement. And I would like to have more local companies obtaining this type of work. I think it's very beneficial to see the surrounding businesses have the opportunity to be funded for supplies, to keep their workers working, and to improve our local economy, which, as you can see on our net, on our financial budget, overall budget, that $1.6 billion scares me. And I am surprised you're still getting the AAA bond rating, to be honest, but you know, that's just my opinion. I didn't get to speak on that and address those issues due to the fact, at your discretion, you don't want the public to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will respond to your response. You're correct, it is at our discretion, and generally speaking, we do not take testimony on reports because we are requiring certain bodies to report back to us as the City Council. And so typically we do not take public testimony on those items, but I hear your point.
It's at your discretion.
Yes, sir.
And when the public request to have the opportunity, it would be
Got it, thank you.
reasonable on this last.
Could you please
item.
call
Thank you.
items 13, 44, and 45 together?
1344, accept the City of Portland 2018 Federal Legislative Agenda. 1345, accept the report on the City of Portland 2018 State Legislative Agenda.
Colleagues, on November 7th, we held a work session with the Office of Government Relations to review and discuss drafts of the City of Portland's 2018 Federal Legislative Agenda and the 2018 State Legislative Agenda. I understand staff has submitted a revised substitute report on the federal agenda. So, colleagues, I'd like to make a motion to consider the substitute report on the City of Portland 2018 Federal Legislative Agenda. Commissioner Fish seconds.
The substitute.
Second.
So we're going to vote on it, Mayor, just have it.
We're going to vote on it, but we're going to give Carla just a second to get back to her spot. Thank you, Carla. Greetings. Carla, please call the roll on the substitute.
Udaley?
Aye.
Fritz?
This is just to put it on the table. Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The substitute is now on the table. And we will be also discussing our federal legislative agenda in quick succession. As the current Congress moves into its second year, it's more important than ever that the City of Portland defend and advance its interests. As we've seen from the Congressional Tax Plan and recent EPA announcements regarding the prioritization of Superfund sites, Congress and the current presidential administration are pivotal in our ability to address community priorities like investing in affordable housing and moving forward with the Portland Harbor cleanup. The administration and the leadership in Congress have made it clear with this tax bill that their priorities are not supporting working middle-class Americans. Additionally, it's clear that local government is going to need to further step up as the federal government retreats from addressing issues like affordable housing and mental health services at the community level. Lastly, as the EPA has issued a list prioritizing the Portland Harbor Superfund site, we'll be working closely with other interested parties to make sure that this process does indeed move forward. And Commissioner Fish and my Chief of Staff, Maurice Henderson, had an opportunity to meet with them this morning, and I'll let him report out as he sees fit. The state legislative agenda focuses on what I believe are the most pressing issues for the short session. That's continuing our efforts to promote affordable and stable housing. In particular, the state constitutional amendment that will allow local governments to leverage bond proceeds with the funds from other community partners continues to be important. I'm obviously very supportive of the clean energy jobs legislation to reduce carbon emissions, and I know we had a long conversation about that here. Climate change is very real, and Oregon needs to continue to be leading on this front. At the same time, we're going to have to continue to reduce emissions of air toxins to protect public health. And finally, I think it's important that we remove statutory barriers which prevent us from effectively coordinating with ODOT to promote public safety, health, and livability on these issues. So with this, I will turn it over to Elizabeth Edwards, who is our government relations Director. We also have Nils Tillstrom here from the Office of Government Relations, and Dan Eisenbeis is here as well. The Three Musketeers. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mayor, Commissioners. Appreciate the introduction, and since you've already announced who we are, I'll kick it off. We're very pleased to be here today to present the 2018 federal and state legislative agendas, respectively, for your consideration and acceptance. So I'll start very quickly with a reminder of the process that we use to develop both agendas, and then we'll go through the federal agenda, then to the state. So we were here before you on November 7th in work session. Before that, we had issued a call out to all bureaus and offices starting in August on the state side and September on the federal side for soliciting legislative concepts. And we worked closely with liaisons, both in bureaus and council offices, to work through and vet those issues. Part of the vetting process also included outreach to our federal legislative delegation and our state legislators, as well as a wide range of stakeholders. And through that process, we were looking for potential areas of alignment or flagging potential hurdles. So turning to the federal legislative agenda, this report is very similar to what you saw at the work session in November, but it's formatted. It's a little bit glossier than it was in November. And I think the mayor already walked through some of the priorities, but I'll reiterate them for council. Once again, the top priority is affordable housing, homeless assistance, mental health, and support services, all kind of packaged in one big omnibus priority. You also have response to the opioid crisis, immigration, investment in urban infrastructure, the Urban Area Security Initiative, which is also known as UASI, and then tax reform and Portland Harbor cleanup were two new additions to the priority list from the 2017 agenda, because we used that as a baseline. 2017 was the first session of the 115th Congress. 2018 is the second session of the 115th Congress. That's why we built off of the 2017 legislative agenda. So, since November work session, I'll note the following changes that occurred. On page 3 of the agenda, you'll see the header of immigration. When we came before you in November, this was sanctuary cities. So we've broadened the direction of this priority, and now it includes references to comprehensive immigration reform, the DREAM Act, and guest worker program.
Elizabeth, could I interrupt you for one
Please.
moment? I have to take care of a piece of homework here. Item 1346 is still open. It is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance that moves to second reading. Sorry, continue.
Not a problem. Turning to page 4 and 5, that's where you'll find the tax reform priority. This has been and continues to be a moving target, and so it's been updated since we were before you during the work session. Added to this header, you have the private activity bonds, which we were just back in DC talking with our congressional delegation about last week with Commissioner Udaley, as well as the historic tax credit program. We also have two additions under the federal policy positions. So on page 7, we now have supporting access to legal services per the recommendation of Commissioner Fish. And on page 9, there is the addition of human trafficking prevention and recovery. Both of those came up during the work session, and they've been added to reflect the comments of council. Those are all the changes from the version that you had before you in November. And I can pause here in case there are questions before moving on to the state side.
A couple of comments, if I could. So on Portland Harbor Superfund cleanup, on the off chance that it's not likely Congress is going to support the reinstatement of the Superfund tax, it is, though, our collective desire to make sure that Region 10 and the EPA have the resources they need to actually oversee all the 21 priority Superfund sites that they have identified and said they're going to move on. When the Mayor's Chief of Staff and I and others today met with Mr. Kelly, the Special Assistant to Administrator Pruitt, the issue did come up around adequate resources to actually oversee implementation of our Superfund cleanup. And so is this broad enough so that it encompasses some kind of bipartisan effort to make sure that there is adequate resources at the region to implement the existing records of decision in those 21 Superfund sites? My guess is this is a bipartisan. My guess is our delegation would be supportive of making sure the region has those resources. So I just want to flag that, because that was one of our three most pressing concerns, that they not that they do have adequate resources to implement the record of decision.
Thank you for the question. I believe that the item is broad enough, and I think that, for the record, Neil Stillstrom from the Office of Government Relations, we can, we'd be happy to work directly with the delegation to formalize that when it's time to make those appropriations requests for the 2019
Good.
funding.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Congressman Blumenauer has put in his bill again to reinstate the Superfund tax, but seems like a tough, heavy, a steep climb.
Mm-hmm.
And so just to make sure that where we may have an agreement here is adequate funding for Superfund, and that may be something that our delegation, our two senators may very well agree with that.
Agreed.
So thank you.
Welcome flag, thank you.
Oh, the other thing I wanted to flag is at page 6, and I'm going to raise the same issue with our state agenda. In the Smart and Emerging Transportation Technology Regulation, it says that we will, that federal regulation must not preempt cities' ability to put in place regulations. When I had the pleasure of being with a couple of you last time in DC, what we heard on the radio and in the media in DC was that there was a bipartisan consensus around preempting us from doing exactly that. So do you have a sense of where that is?
So we are currently working with other interested parties, other cities, to work on what's called the AV START Act. It's a Senate bill to make sure that there is language that would not preempt. I mean, would block any preemption of federal laws. We had numerous calls over the last couple of days. There's actually a number of senators who have an interest in both that preemption and then also how it would impact the California air quality standards that we in this state rely on as well.
Good. It was alarming to me on our trip that there were these allies of Silicon Valley technology companies who were Democrats who were generally supportive of the idea of preempting cities like Portland from being able to regulate autonomous vehicles, and to me that would be a disaster. So thank you.
Thank you.
And Commissioner, I think that speaks to the value of having local government officials come back to DC and actually tell the on-the-ground story, because the 30,000-foot view might make a lot of sense when not faced with the other side of the story about what it's like to actually run and regulate city streets and the impact that it has on traffic safety and livability.
Thank you.
So with that, I will turn to the state legislative agenda. Also formatted a little bit glossier than what you saw in November. This is actually, the content is very, very similar. For the upcoming short legislative session, the top priority continues to be affordable and stable housing. That's followed by a healthy environment, community livability and public health, and local funding and authority. So there are two changes since the work session, and it starts on page 2. There is a technical edit to the way that the description of the municipal bonding concept that was very minor. And then on page 4, the first subheading here under the community livability and public health priority has been, the subheading and the concept description have been updated in order to more accurately reflect the desired policy outcome. So it's now entitled Remove Barriers to Coordinating Management of Public Spaces and Services. Before it had been framed up as more of a funding request, and it's through the vetting process has been determined to be strictly a policy ask. And those are the two changes from the work session draft. I would also note these, the drafts have been up on our website for public review since we met in November. I think I neglected to say that earlier.
What kind of feedback have you been getting?
It's been fairly quiet. Although we did have our, the public input session before, shortly before the work session.
And the input from that went into setting the agenda?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, on page 5, under the sort of blanket opposition that we normally include to being preempted, the closest thing to TNCs that I see here is regulation of emerging technologies. But given our history with the TNCs seeking to explicitly preempt us from regulating them, would it be useful to be specific to TNCs, or do you view emerging technologies as being brought, as encompassing TNCs?
So the language is crafted here to say emerging technologies because there's actually quite a bit of overlap when it comes to TNCs and autonomous vehicles. When you look at the fact that TNCs often own fleets and are looking at autonomous vehicles, and there's legislation on that side that impacts how we regulate TNCs.
But from your point of view, this language is intended to cover both autonomous vehicles and TNCs?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Very good. Any further questions?
I'll briefly describe next steps, if that's...
Yeah, please.
All right, so next month we'll be back down in Salem for January organizational days. That's when bills will be introduced, and we anticipate likely about 260 bills for the 35-day session. After organizational days, we'll have 3 weeks before they actually gavel in for the start of session on February 5th. So in that 3-week window, we'll be reviewing and analyzing the bulk of legislation for its impact on the city. Expect that we'll be reaching out to you and your bureaus for input during that window of time and going forward into the session. Also, before the start of session, we'll host our annual legislative breakfast and invite members of the Portland delegation to City Hall to discuss our agenda and look for areas of collaboration. Wanted to put a reminder out there that January 23rd is a special election. So less than 2 weeks before the start of the February session, we may find out whether we have a big hole in the state's budget outlook or not. So that's a large question mark. And then finally, looking nationally, also in January, which is going to be a very busy month, the U.S. Conference of Mayors will be convening, and we'll also be arranging meetings for the West Coast mayors to discuss areas of common interest and talk with our federal delegation as well. So I wanted to put that out there and also just say thank you. Thank you to you all for your help through this process. Thank you to the legislative liaisons. Thank you to my team for the long hours it took to put this together. We're really excited to help push this ambitious agenda on behalf of the city.
Commissioner Fritz.
Could you just remind or inform everybody watching at home, what are the rules for the short session of the Oregon legislature? What can each legislator do?
Absolutely. So for a short legislative session, it's constitutionally limited to 35 days. Based on chamber rules, the senators will get 1 bill apiece. House members will get 2 bills. Committees will get 3. The governor and the judicial branch will each get 5. You have a couple of committees that have an ability to introduce more, like the Ways and Means Committee, but those are the parameters, and that's how we calculated approximately 260 bills for the upcoming session. You also have chamber deadlines, so if I am a House bill, I need to move out of a House Policy Committee before the first chamber deadline. That's going to occur in less than 2 weeks, which means that you have a finite number of hearings in order to actually have your idea heard before a panel and then moved forward. 2, maybe 3 meetings. So it goes very, very fast. It is a sprint. That's the session
great.
in a nutshell.
Why do House representatives get 2 bills and senators get 1? You would think it would be the other way around.
You would, because the House now ends up with 4 times the number of bills that the Senate does.
Yeah.
My impression is that the Senate is trying to really restrict the scope of the short session. The House doesn't necessarily take the same perspective.
So they each get to set their own rules?
Correct.
I see. Thank you. And also just remind everybody, what's the balance of representation in the 2 houses?
1 vote shy of a supermajority in both houses. So a supermajority is that threshold for revenue raising or tax increases. You're looking at a 17-13 split in the Senate and 25-35 in the House.
With the Democrats having
Democrats in
majorities in both houses. Thank
Correct.
you.
Yeah.
Colleagues, unless there's any other questions, I'll take a motion on the substitute for 1344.
So moved.
Second.
We have a enthusiastic motion from Commissioner Udaley and a second from Commissioner Fritz. Please call the roll.
Udaley?
I have a toothache, Mayor, so I
I
forgive
hate
my
that.
lack of enthusiasm.
Yeah, I'm sorry
Aye.
to hear that.
Fritz?
Thank you to the Office of Government Relations, particularly Elizabeth Edwards, in your leadership of the Bureau after departure of Martha Pellegrino, which I know we're still all feeling. And thank you especially for continuing to work with Commissioner Udaley and me on the legislative agenda setting forum that we hold for community members, because their input really does make a difference. And hopefully after this short session we can have maybe a community event after the session, before the summer, so that we can tell folks what happened and start a lot earlier in 2018, knowing that there'll be much more capacity for doing different things in the State House, in the state legislature at least, in 2019. So I'm delighted to continue to work with you. Aye.
Fish?
Mayor, is this on the substitute or on the final?
Substitute.
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The substitute is adopted to 1345. I'll accept a motion.
So moved.
Second.
A motion from Commissioner Fish, a second from Commissioner Fritz. Please call the roll.
Udaley?
Well, I just want to thank Elizabeth and Government Relations for preparing me for a wonderful first trip to Washington, D.C. I managed to at least meet 6 out of 7 members of our congressional delegation and meet with 5 of them. And I wasn't sure what to expect, or didn't necessarily even understand the importance of bringing the voice of Portlanders to DC. And as it turned out, given the passage of the tax bills in the House and the Senate, it was quite timely, and our focus was primarily on the potential devastating impact on affordable housing development with the loss of private activity bonds and low-income housing tax credits. I don't think I have additional comments on the federal side, so I'll just say aye.
Fritz?
I appreciate your ongoing connection of us with our federal delegation when they visit back in Oregon during the sessions and over the course of time too. I feel like we have good relationships between members of the council and our delegation, and certainly that you and Vicky Cram represent us well in Washington, D.C. I very much appreciate the work you do. It must be quite, it's hard to know what word to use at this point, but certainly challenging and disappointing and difficult to keep one's optimism, although there are occasional bright lights. So thank you very much. Aye.
Fish?
Now I'm completely confused about what we're voting on, so I'm just going to assume I'm making comments about both agendas. And thank you for the good work you did in compiling the federal and state agenda. In the 9 years I've been on the council, we've had some tough years, lean years, where we've had big needs, but it's just politically been harder. Yet it seems to me we always outperform. And so even in these perilous times, hopefully we'll find agreement on some of the things that, at least in Washington, now the balance of power has shifted to 4 United States senators of the Republican Party. Let's hope that we can, build some bipartisanship around some common sense things that we care about: housing, cleaning up the environment, brownfields, a number of these things. It appears that the deficit reduction is no longer an issue of concern in Washington, so we don't have to worry about that, which I guess means hopefully we don't have to do any offsets or anything new we want under the new rules, but who knows. But it is a pleasure to work with you and your team, and thank you for your good work, and let's go to it. Aye.
Wheeler?
Great report. We spent quite a while narrowing this down to a few issues, knowing that it's a sprint. The short session, 35 days, seems like a lot, but once you get to it, it's actually a blink of the eye. And I think we've picked appropriate strategies. I think we're continuing to put pressure on the right policy initiatives. And considering the list we started out with at our work sessions, I feel like collectively we've done an excellent job. I vote aye. The The report's accepted. Thank you.
So we don't have to do the state separately?
We do.
We just
We
did.
did.
No, we did federal.
No, we did those both federal. Now we've got the move to accept the
Yeah.
state report.
I'll accept a motion.
I just did.
So, I'll second that.
Okay, very good. Call the roll.
Daly?
So we touched on the short session and the limitations of the number of bills that can be brought forth by various entities. I just want to state that my personal agenda will continue to be tenant protections, and I want to acknowledge that they're not included in this short session agenda in a big or meaningful way, because there just wasn't a sense that there was a path forward in this short session. But I am very pleased to see the focus on local funding and authority, which I would personally prefer to call state interference with local power. And that includes the state interfering with our ability to regulate our housing and rental markets. So thank you for that, and thank you for your work. Aye.
Fritz?
I think my comments over these last three votes, including now this one, illustrate how helpful it is to have government relation people who know what we were intending to talk about, even if we weren't actually testifying on or speaking on the right item. For all of the ones, though, I also wanted to comment about the financial impact and public involvement statements. They were all very clear, and it was you included how the public input was responded to and included in the agenda. So I hope that community members share my trust in you, that we will that their voices are heard and that they can make a difference in lobbying at the state and the federal level. Aye.
Fish?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. Report's accepted. Thank you. Item number 1347, Commissioner Fishes, if you could read it first. Carla, please.
Authorize a competitive solicitation and contract with the lowest responsible bidder for construction of the Montevilla North Sewer Rehabilitation Project number E10385 for an estimated cost of $6,225,000.
Carla, could we read that in tandem with 1348?
1348, authorize a competitive solicitation and contract with the lowest responsible bidder for construction of the Montevilla South Sewer Rehabilitation Project, number E10386, for an estimated cost of $4 million.
Mayor and colleagues, we're joined today by Scott Gibson, BES Manager for Design Services, and David Hammond, BES Civil Engineer. These ordinances will authorize the Bureau of Environmental Services to move forward on the Montevilla Sewer Rehabilitation Program for both the north and the south parts of the Montevilla neighborhood. BES needs to rehabilitate, replace, and construct about 4 miles of sewer pipes in the Montevilla neighborhood. The existing pipes are about 80 years old and at risk of failure. The project is necessary to protect water quality, public health, private property, and our environment. Scott and David, please take it away.
Thank you, Commissioner Fish. For the record, my name is Scott Gibson, and as the Commissioner mentioned, these projects are going to rehabilitate a portion of failing sewers. They're both a part of a Phase 2 pipe rehabilitation line item in the budget. To date, we spent $104 million on that program to rehabilitate about 37 miles of sewer. That's roughly 1.5% of the sewer assets that we have. David here will give you an overview of the two projects that we're requesting approval on today.
My name is David Hammond. I'm the project manager for these two Montevilla North and Montevilla South items. As you can see on the slide in front of you, that these are some photographic images from the pipes in these neighborhoods, and a good indication of the types of defects and need for rehabilitation that we've come across in examining the sewer. As stated by Commissioner Fish, the projects were installed between 1910 and 1960. There's a wide variety of materials out there. And we also have homes in the service areas that are not properly connected to the sewer system. And improper connections includes items such as shared laterals or unclear ownership of laterals, which we are trying to resolve and clean up with these projects. By replacing or rehabilitating these types of sanitary sewer mains, sewer laterals, and manholes, these projects will increase the system capacity and reliability, as well as protect public health, property, and the environment by reducing the risk of sewage releases to homes, businesses, and streets. On Montevilla North, this project will replace or rehabilitate highly deteriorated sewer pipes and includes resolving 32 non-conforming sewer connections. We have a variety of proposed construction methods in this, which includes open-cut trenching, cured-in-place pipe, and horizontal directional drilling. There's about 6,100 lineal feet of open-cut pipe, 7,500 feet of CIPP, and 2,000 lineal feet of pipe bursting, as well as 200 lineal feet of spot repairs. This map shows the project boundaries for the Montevilla North and the Montevilla South projects. As you can see, north was defined to be bounded by Northeast Wisteria Drive on the north, Southeast 88th to the east, Southeast Stark to the south, and 35th to the west. There's 42 project site locations in Montevilla North project. And as you can see, the south will be picking up and taking on more parts of the community. The Montevilla South will rehab or replace sewers and 6 sewer extensions to resolve non-conforming sewer connections currently. Again, the proposed construction methods on the south project includes open-cut trenching, cured-in-place pipe, and horizontal directional drilling. In this project, there's about 3,800 lineal feet of open cut, 2,600 feet of CIPP, and 85 lineal feet of horizontal directional drilling. The boundary for the Montevilla South project is Stark to the north, Southeast 82nd to the east, Southeast Taggart to the south, and Southeast 71st to the west. There are 25 work sites in the south project. Because of these projects being geographically next to each other, the outreach for these have always been combined throughout the life of the 2 projects. BES public involvement staff has done extensive outreach to homeowners, schools, business, and neighborhood associations through personal contact, flyers, a website, newsletters, and presentations at neighborhood association meetings. The outreach efforts over the past few years has been directed to more than 8,600 property owners, occupants, residents, and businesses in the combined project areas. They've also attended meetings and talked with neighborhood business associations, schools, churches, parks, theaters, restaurants, and small businesses in the areas. A website was created and is still being kept up to date. That will be kept up to date through the life of the projects to continue to disseminate information. The outreach is trying to explain the impacts that may be encountered when a project like this takes place in their neighborhoods. Some of those impacts would be noise, dust, vibration, staging of pipe or other materials on streets, some parking removal, traffic controls, and that there could also be delays because of the traffic controls or the construction that's happening. There are also 3 locations that have been identified and received permits for night work and noise variances. Montevilla North will be having night work on Halsey and 71st, on East Burnside between Northeast Gillum and 69th Avenue, and Broadway Schuler Streets between Northeast 35th and 36th Avenue. On Montevilla South, there is 1 location requiring night work at Southeast 82nd and Mill Street, and continues 234 feet west along Mill Street. The engineer's estimate, as shown for north, is $6.225 million and $4 million for Montevilla South. The project level of confidence is high on both projects. Both projects are residential rehab projects typical of other ones we've done in the past. We believe we've accounted for possible issues in construction and expect to receive reliable unit prices as far as the cost estimating of the projects goes. We were hoping to advertise in December, but obviously it's probably going to end up being in January with the holidays coming upon us. Construction is expected to last about 12 months on Montebello North, as it's a larger project, and then 8 months for the south. That's all.
Scott, are we assuming we can stay close to these timelines, are we still planning to do some event in or around March, like a coffee or something at the Bipartisan or someplace in the community like we did in Hawthorne?
That's a good suggestion. I don't, David, do you know, I don't think that was planned for these, but.
No, I've heard it mentioned, but I haven't heard seen anything scheduled
Let's talk about
yet.
it in our.
Yeah, we'll follow up on that. Thank you.
Well, the last time we did it in Hawthorne, we caught some people that sort of roughly knew about it, but were then surprised to hear in front of their business where people were like in pods that were supposed to be quiet, they were doing all the drilling, so we were able to make a few tweaks. So let's plan on doing, this is a very disruptive project, as my colleagues can see from the map. We've had the A team of people doing outreach, but there's still going to be people that are going to be surprised to find out that we're doing it. They'll be delighted we're spending $10 million. But I think if we could do at least one more coffee outreach sometime around March, it would behoove us.
Thank you. We're happy to do that.
Commissioner Fritz?
Does this project, or one of these projects, include the area that we talked about this morning with the local improvement district?
Yes, it does, the Montebello South project. Right now, the work on those streets is in these project documents and in that cost estimate, not knowing if it was going to be approved or not. So we were proceeding with planning on doing the work, and now there looks like it's going, once we know for sure it's going to happen, which sounds like it will, then we'll remove that from the scope of work on South.
And would you be able to do the I don't know how long each individual section takes, but would it be possible to do the section near Bridger Elementary in the summertime so that it doesn't disrupt kids walking?
Yeah, that'll be a requirement of the project documents, that anything in the vicinity of the school has to take place when school's not in session.
Yeah. You might also consider using the PTA as a forum where people might be willing to come in.
Good idea.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Thank you.
Very good. Is there any public testimony on 1347 or 1348?
No one signed up.
Any further questions? Well done, you guys. 1347 is the first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading. 1348 is the first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It also moves to second reading. 1349 is a second reading. Could you please read the item?
Amend the boundary of the Northwest 20th Avenue Local Improvement District to accept $500,000 in funding from ESCO Corporation, include and assess property at 2141 Northwest 25th Avenue to fund traffic signal replacement and intersection improvements to the Northwest 23rd Avenue and Northwest Vaughn Street and US Highway 30 intersection.
Any further discussion, colleagues? Please call the roll.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The ordinance is amended. Last item, 1350.
Authorize the Bureau of Transportation to acquire certain permanent and temporary rights necessary for construction of the St. John's Truck Strategy Phase 2 project through the exercise of the city's eminent domain authority.
Do we have anybody from the Transportation Bureau here? Yes. Come on up.
The most patient person.
Yeah, no kidding. And at the 12-6 council meeting, while he's coming up here, there was a property owner request, as you'll all recall, to redesign a portion in the North Lombard Avenue sidewalk. And we wanted to carry this over to hear the results of that conversation, although the record is closed on this item.
Great. Rich Newlands, Portland Bureau of Transportation. I'm the project manager. And yes, we have talked with the property owner about moving the curb out to build the sidewalk in a way that does not need any acquisition of right-of-way.
And you don't need any temporary easements either?
In that particular location, we don't even need a temporary, but for the rest of the project, there's sidewalk further to the north. We do need temporary easements.
So I move the amendment to remove the words permanent and from the title and to remove exhibits 25, 26, 27, and 28, which all pertain to the same property who testified at the hearing.
Second.
We have a motion on the table from Commissioner Fritz, seconded by Commissioner Fish, as contained in the December 7th letter to the City Council from PBOT. Any further discussion on that item? First, let's call the roll on the amendment.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The ordinance, or the amendment, is adopted. Is there any further discussion on the main motion?
I'd like to move to add an emergency clause to read that the council declares that an emergency exists because delay in property acquisition at this location may result in a delay in construction and impact the overall project completion. Therefore, this ordinance shall be in full force and effect from and after its passage by the council.
Second.
Commissioner Fritz moves the emergency clause. Commissioner Fish seconds. Please call the roll on the amendment.
Udaly.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. Any further discussion on the main motion? Please call the roll.
Udaly.
I'd just like to say that I really appreciated that property owner who came and testified on December 6th. She certainly had reason to be unhappy, but she came in well-informed and presented in an incredibly pleasant and helpful manner, and it was just a refreshing experience. So thank you. I can't remember your name, but I wanted to acknowledge that. Aye.
Fritz.
Well, thank you to Rich Newlands as well. You've been a person who's been in the Bureau of Transportation for a long time and is known for being a good listener and to wanting to work things out, so I appreciate that very much. I also want to thank Janine Gates on my staff who brought the issues to my attention within the exhibits in her briefing beforehand. And I'm very glad that we've got to this successful resolution. I know the community is going to be very, very happy to have the project done, so thank you for that. Aye.
Fish.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Great work. I really appreciate it. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted as amended, and we are adjourned until Thursday at 2 p.m.